The Jared Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. If you want to call to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. All right. What are we going to talk about tonight? I got a story to tell you. A story from when I was back in the Coast Guard, which was a really long time ago. I was 22, 23 years old. As you know, I graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 1996. And that was an unpleasant experience. It was what it was. They say about the Coast Guard Academy, it's a good place to be from, not a good place to be. They also say about the Coast Guard Academy, it's a $200,000 education shoved up your ass a nickel at a time. Anyway, when I graduated, I was assigned to a ship in Port Angeles, Washington. And Port Angeles is an unhappy town on the Olympic Peninsula to the west of Seattle, if you're familiar with your geography of Washington State. So it was a 210-foot cutter, which was sort of a medium-sized cutter for the Coast Guard, and it was called the Active. And it had 72 people on board. It had 60 enlisted and 12 officers. The captain was a commander in 05. That's equivalent to a lieutenant colonel in the Army. The XO was a lieutenant commander. I was an ensign. I was a brand new officer. The ship was built in 1966 and did not have a lot of amenities. And that ship is still around, by the way. And it's now 55 years old, and it's still out there doing stuff. I was assigned to a stateroom that was known as the anti-gravity chamber because, you know, the boat didn't really rock from side to side. It pitched forward and backwards, and my stateroom was up on the bow where all the pitching was, and if you were in rough seas, if you were in your bed, you would literally catch air while you were sleeping. The anti-gravity chamber. And I used to get very, very seasick. Now, I started out, my first job was the weapons officer, and there were some weapons on board. There was a 25 millimeter machine gun. There were 250 caliber machine guns, and there was a bunch of small arms. And I had a gunner's mate working for me, and it was my job to take care of all this stuff. Pretty big responsibility for somebody that was 22. Then, after that, I became a department head. I became the deck department head in charge of about 20 or so people. Anyway, sometime in 1997, there were these two women that came by the ship. They were very well dressed, and I was unaccustomed to that. I mean, we were wearing these working blue uniforms, and we were all scuzzy, and people were painting and working in the engine room, and these very clean, very well-dressed women came aboard the ship to talk about financial planning. And they were wearing suits. Now, we were all on the mess deck, which was the eating area on the ship. We were all on the mess deck, and everybody was gathered there. And they started talking about something called assurance. Not insurance, but assurance. And it was this financial product that grew at an exponential rate. And they said if you just save $50 a month, then over time it could grow into several $1,000s. And they didn't really talk about the mechanism behind how this works, but you know, they were sort of singing the virtues of savings and thrift and putting money away for the future in this product called assurance. Now, I didn't know what assurance was. And they kept putting up these slides about how if you invested $50 a paycheck, it could grow into thousands of dollars. They kept talking about how people had to start saving early. So let me be clear. You know, I was 22, 23. I had no exposure to finance whatsoever. I was, you know, some people, I was out to lunch. There was a waitress today. She says, I know nothing about money. And there's a lot of people in that position. And by the way, if you are one of these people that know nothing about money, then feel free to call the show. Call 844-305-7800 and ask dumb questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Just ask a question, and we'll help you out. Otherwise, you're going to be in this position. You're going to be in the position I was in back in 1997, where I had no idea what these people were talking about. And my attitude at the time was I wasn't going to put my money into something I didn't understand. And they were very slick. They were very fast talkers. And I don't think anyone on that mess deck understood what they were talking about. So I did not invest in assurance, but there were several people that did. A couple of months later, we found out that the whole thing was a giant Ponzi scheme. They were stealing people's money. And so everyone that invested in this thing lost money. And these women, there was an article in the news in the Seattle paper that said that they made about $3 million on this. And they were going to military bases and signing people up for this and taking money from military members. Like, you're going to smoke a turd in hell for that one. So, like I said, I didn't invest in it, and I didn't lose any money. And, we were on the tail end of the Ponzi scheme, and people only contributed to this thing for a couple of months before it unraveled. So nobody lost too much money on the ship. But I can tell you that as I was standing there watching this thing, I felt completely helpless. Because there was no way for me to tell whether this was legitimate or not. I did not have the knowledge to ask the right questions to poke holes in this thing. Of course, now, if this happens to me today, if I were there for that lecture, it would have been very easy to tell that this was a fraud. And that's one of the reasons they were going after military people, because they were very financially unsophisticated and they didn't know the right questions to answer. So anyone who promises those types of returns risk-free is a fraud. But then I didn't know how to ask the right questions, and I felt crippled by my lack of financial knowledge. So that was when I made a decision. I made a decision right then and there to take responsibility for my own financial education, because I did not want to be in a position where somebody was trying to sell me a financial product that I didn't understand, and I had to evaluate whether this was legitimate or not. So that's where it began. So I started going to bookstores and buying all the financial books that I could just to learn about this stuff, and I have been learning ever since. So just in general, you should have a very low level of trust when it comes to your money, okay? And this is why people give their money to established firms like Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan and stuff like that. These firms have been around for 100 years, and they've established 100 years of trust. Having said that, there are also advantages to going with independent financial advisors. But from a trust standpoint, if you know that there's a firm that's been around for 100 years and they have a name brand, that definitely means something. So anytime someone comes up to you asking for money, you should have a very low level of trust. It's like the Big Five personality test, the agreeableness score. You should have a very low agreeableness score. And if you don't have the ability to evaluate this thing, don't do it. I mean, that's what the SEC says all the time. They tweet about this constantly. If somebody is trying to sell you a financial product that you don't understand, then don't buy it. Walk away. And people, this is where the agreeableness score comes in. People want to please people, and they want to be friendly and helpful. And that's where they get themselves into trouble. Make them tell you exactly how this product works. Make them tell you exactly how this money is going to be invested. And if they give you a bunch of nonsense, then don't invest. Now, I'm not telling you to trust nobody, because if you trust nobody, you have to trust somebody eventually, okay? Or you can do this yourself with something like Vanguard or Janus or T. Rowe Price or Fidelity or stuff like that. You can go with established asset managers and manage your own mutual funds. But, after a while, you might outgrow this, and you might need professional help, and you might need to get a financial advisor. But you are responsible. You alone are responsible for your financial education. And if you are not educated, you don't have the ability to evaluate these things. And what that means is, if you are not financially educated, you will always be dependent on someone else when it comes to your money. Dependent. And that's not a good place to be. We've in the past we've talked about examples where you have couples where one person handles all the money in the marriage. One person handles all the money and the other person is in the dark. And that's a very dangerous place to be. We talk about financial independence, not financial dependence. Independence. There are a lot of resources online where you can learn about money. For example, Investopedia is a great resource. If you don't know what a money market fund is, you do some research. If you don't know what volatility is, you do some research. You need to do this work now. You need to spend time on your financial education. Do it when you can, not when you have to. You can do that by listening to the show. My goal here is to help people and help people get smarter about money. So you can do it by listening to the show, but you can also supplement this with your own reading. Okay. Now, as for the women in the Ponzi scheme, I'm not sure what happened to them. I don't know if they went to jail or anything. I tried looking it up on the internet. I couldn't find anything. But can you imagine ripping off military people? This isn't just about Ponzi schemes, but you can always recognize a Ponzi scheme by promising very high risk-free returns. Everyone knows about Madoff. His so-called hedge fund was puking out 15% a year every single year. And there were people who saw that and knew it was a fraud, and $50 billion later, it basically wiped out all of Palm Beach. I remember when that happened. We were having the launch party for my newsletter in a bar on 9th Avenue when people got the news. So don't be a victim of fraud. Educate yourself and ask questions. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.